There we go. So hello and good afternoon to everyone, our panelists and the audience who are listening to this panel. So welcome to panel 2, devoted to the question of network society in the age of the pandemic and with COVID-19. So we were happy to be able to organize this panel specifically with great 4 panelists who are going to talk to us about the different aspects of the network society and the implications of the pandemic and virtuality, basically, for our the current situation. Now, this panel is going to be bilingual. As I said a little bit earlier, we have Camelia here who's going to do her presentation in French, but she told me that she will have no problem in getting questions in English afterwards. In any case, I will be available here in case any translation was needed. So, Camelia, would you be okay to go first? So, can I introduce you?
Oui, bien sûr, oui. C'est juste que je dois vérifier si je peux partager mon PDF.
Voilà, très bien. Donc, tout en bas, normalement, tout en bas, il y a l'option pour partage. Donc, soit vous partagez le PDF, soit vous partagez l'écran. Donc, les deux fonctionnent. So, this is me switching to French now. I'm going to introduce Professor Camelia Cusnir in French, and then she's going to do her presentation in French. Then I'll switch back to English and have the other person on the list. So, Camelia Cusnir est chargée de cours et directrice du master francophone Médias, Développement et Société à la faculté de journalisme et des sciences de la communication à l'Université de Bucharest. Je vous souhaite le bienvenu avec nous à Lille virtuellement. Elle est l'auteur d'un livre sur les discours des intellectuels roumains après 1989 et de plusieurs articles sur cette même thématique. Ses recherches portent sur la transformation de la sphère publique par l'Internet et l'apparition de nouveaux leaders d'opinion en ligne. Donc, la parole est à vous, chère Camelia.
Merci, mais je ne sais pas si vous voyez mon PDF. En fait, je l'ai téléchargé. C'était écrit que le traitement était en cours.
D'accord.
Je choisis
Voilà.
sur média et normalement, ça devrait marcher.
Parfait.
Okay,
Ça prend un petit moment, mais normalement, ça fonctionne.
Ouais,
voilà.
D'accord. OK, super. Merci. Donc, merci de cette opportunité de présenter quelques résultats en fait préliminaires d'une recherche qui s'intéresse aux manifestations, je les appelais comme ça, des manifestations créatives de solidarité sur les réseaux sociaux numériques pendant la crise sanitaire que nous avons traversée, enfin nous traversons encore. Juste un instant, car je ne sais pas exactement. Je découvre maintenant. Voilà, j'ai découvert comment défiler en fait ma présentation. Donc, le contexte que nous prenons en compte pour ce questionnement est bien sûr celui de la crise sanitaire qui a été marquée d'une part par l'augmentation de l'utilisation des réseaux sociaux numériques. Il y a les statistiques qui nous disent que bon, dans les situations de confinement, de repli sur soi, de quelque part d'isolement, il y a eu, enfin les statistiques, les chiffres nous montrent qu'il y a eu une consommation augmentée des réseaux sociaux numériques. Et en plus, il y a des études qui ont relevé que dans ce contexte exceptionnel d'isolement physique, de confinement, souvent l'utilisation des réseaux sociaux est utilisée pour rester en contact et pour se détendre comme moyen d'évasion, d'escapisme, disons. Donc, j'ai démarré cette recherche en me posant quelques questions. Comment est-ce que les utilisateurs, pas seulement utilisateurs, mais utilisateurs producteurs de contenu sur les réseaux sociaux réagissent finalement dans une période qui est caractérisée. Je vais expliquer que j'utilise, enfin j'emploie pour la lecture de ces manifestations, j'emploie quelques termes qui relèvent de l'anthropologie. Donc, dans une période qui est caractérisée par la liminalité, et on a considéré la période de confinement comme étant une période qu'on peut définir comme une période caractérisée par la liminalité. Quelles sont les formes d'expression en ligne qui sont caractéristiques à cette période? Est-ce qu'on peut identifier des manifestations de communitas? Je reviendrai ensuite. C'est aussi un thème qui relève de l'anthropologie. Est-ce qu'on peut parler donc des manifestations de communitas dans les manifestations des utilisateurs sur les réseaux sociaux? Je constate que, enfin, je ne sais pas si vous voyez tout le slide de ma présentation. Je ne vois qu'une partie. On ne voit pas la partie qui est en bas. Bon. Est-ce que vous voyez tout?
En fait, nous, on voit les 4 points que vous avez sur la droite. La dernière chose qu'on voit en bas sur votre slide, c'est corpus d'analyse, publication sur Facebook.
Vous voyez ça, parce que
Ouais.
moi, je ne vois pas.
Ouais.
D'accord. Parce que moi, je ne vois pas la partie en bas de mon écran, donc je ne vois pas le 4e point. C'est affiché sans... Mais enfin, ce n'est pas grave. Donc, le corpus d'analyse, en fait, il est constitué jusqu'à présent, parce que c'est toujours une recherche qui est en cours. Il est constitué présentement des publications sur Facebook qui ont été recueillies pendant le mois de mars 2020 et qui sont des publications qui ont eu une grande viralité, qui ont été très virales sur les réseaux sociaux. Quelques références théoriques, juste pour vous dire qu'en fait, je me suis proposé de lire, enfin d'analyser ces publications qui ont eu une importante viralité, qui ont été très virales sur les réseaux sociaux, en faisant appel à un instrumentaire qui relève de l'anthropologie, le rituel, la liminalité, le communitas. Et une définition de la liminalité, en fait, un événement est caractérisé par la liminalité, donc la période entre le déclenchement d'une crise et finalement la période de réagrégation des structures sociales après avoir traversé la crise. Et c'est une période qui est considérée comme étant très propice à l'utilisation des constructions symboliques. Et en fait, j'ai interprété j'ai construit un peu toute l'analyse en prenant en compte ces références. Donc, selon Turner, les caractéristiques de la liminalité sont finalement l'ambiguïté, parce que c'est une phase qui est entre les deux, les entités liminales ne sont ni ici ni là, et c'est un peu ce qui s'est passé surtout au début de la crise sanitaire, les règles avec les règles, enfin les catégories même culturelles avec lesquelles nous étions habitués, nos règles de fonctionnement jusqu'à ce moment-là avaient un peu explosé. Nous avons été mis tous dans une situation où on essayait finalement de définir la situation et de trouver de nouvelles règles. En fait, ces concepts de l'anthropologie avaient été utilisés auparavant aussi pour comprendre les représentations offertes par les médias de certains événements. Il y a enfin tout un courant de recherche qui s'intéresse à ça et qui s'appelle l'anthropologie des médias. Mais cette fois, je me suis proposé de transposer en fait ces concepts de l'anthropologie pour comprendre un peu ce qui s'est passé sur les réseaux sociaux cette fois et sur les manifestations des utilisateurs des réseaux sociaux numériques dans une période de liminalité qui a été en fait la crise sanitaire, en faisant appel à l'instrumentaire de l'anthropologie. Pardon, je me suis perdue un peu, juste un instant. Ensuite, évidemment, parce qu'on parle des réseaux sociaux, on est dans un contexte où les utilisateurs deviennent régulièrement des participants au processus de création. du contenu. Et là, on peut passer en revue toutes les théories qui font état de ce fait. C'est quelque chose qu'on doit prendre en compte. Donc, le producteur-consommateur de contenu, le prosumer et ensuite le concept de mass self-communication que Castells propose pour donner un nom à cette nouvelle forme de communication interactive qui n'est plus unidirectionnelle, comme c'était le cas de la communication à l'époque des médias traditionnels, mais qui est orientée de plusieurs à plusieurs. En fait, c'est la capacité finalement d'envoyer des messages et on propose de plusieurs à plusieurs en transformant le modèle unidirectionnel de la communication. Et j'avance, je ne sais pas combien de minutes il me reste pour un peu me recentrer. Donc, combien de minutes, est-ce que vous pouvez me dire combien de minutes il me reste pour la présentation?
Vous avez encore 10 minutes.
Ah, ok, c'est bon.
Ouais, ouais.
D'accord. OK. Donc, on remarque que les technologies, les nouvelles technologies ont donné finalement du pouvoir aux consommateurs à produire et à distribuer leur propre contenu. Et quelque chose que je trouve que c'est intéressant dans le contexte de mon analyse, c'est cette question si finalement ces nouveaux protocoles de communication agissent comme des ponts entre les divisions culturelles ou comme un instrument de fragmentation finalement de la communication. Quelques résultats préliminaires. En fait, après une première analyse de mon corpus, ce que j'ai pu constater, c'est qu'on trouve ces éléments de communitas. Communitas, c'est une nouvelle structure qui normalement, par laquelle les anthropologues avaient essayé d'expliquer la nouvelle structure qui se construit dans une situation de liminalité. Donc, dans cette période finalement de questionnement et de recherche après le déclenchement d'une crise. Donc, on peut retrouver dans les publications qui sont très virales sur les réseaux sociaux des éléments de communitas caractérisés par l'abandon des lois qui étaient valables jusqu'à ce moment-là et des règles qui géraient précédemment la société. L'un des exemples, c'est l'accès libre aux biens culturels qui autrefois était accessible uniquement, qui était payant, qui avant était payant. Il y avait, surtout au début du confinement, une prolifération. Là, ce sont des publications sur Facebook, mais que parfois, enfin, pour vous montrer la capture d'écran, j'ai repris également les liens sur le site, mais elles fonctionnaient comme des publications sur Facebook. Il y avait une prolifération des propositions d'accès libre à différents biens culturels qui autrefois étaient payants, par exemple des visites virtuelles des musées, accès libre aux films, au visionnement des films, accès libre aux livres ou encore il y avait des institutions culturelles qu'on peut qualifier de qui faisaient partie on pourrait dire qu'ils font partie de la culture d'élite, comme je ne sais pas, l'Opéra métropolitain de New York ou l'Opéra de Paris, qui offrait gratuitement des spectacles en ligne. Donc l'idée, c'est que ce sont des exemples qui prouvent que pendant cette période-là, on abandonne les lois et les règles qui fonctionnaient jusqu'à l'époque-là et il y a une sorte de délibération, de libération et délibération. Et, on peut aussi interpréter ça comme une compensation pour le fait qu'on était confinés, on était isolés chez nous Et ce genre de proposition faisait arrivait à avoir une grande popularité sur les réseaux sociaux, justement parce que c'était des propositions d'évasion du quotidien. Ensuite, une autre catégorie de publications qui mérite d'être mentionnée, ce sont les publications qui étaient très virales sur Facebook. C'était des publications où il y avait des manifestations symboliques des gens qui, et c'est par ce type de manifestation de montrer leur solidarité et en même temps de donner du sens finalement à ce qu'ils vivaient. Et, dans cette catégorie-là, bon, j'ai des captures d'écran. La plupart, ce sont des vidéos où il y a des gens qui sortent dans leur balcon, par exemple, pour chanter dans de différents pays européens. Je pense que tous, nous avons vu au moins une publication de ce type. Et j'ai quelque part noté aussi les chiffres en termes de engagement pour ces publications qui sont vraiment très importants. Il y a des vidéos qui comptent des centaines de milliers de vues. Là, il y avait aussi à droite, il y avait un professeur de yoga qui, donc toujours pendant le premier mois de confinement, il y avait un professeur de yoga qui avait proposé une leçon gratuite de yoga sur le toit d'un bâtiment et qui était regardée par les propriétaires des appartements aux alentours qui participaient eux aussi à cette leçon de yoga. Et c'est l'une des vidéos de ce genre qui avait fait de bruit, disons, sur les réseaux sociaux. Et ensuite, on a une musicien, parce qu'on a vu ça souvent, des musiciens, des chanteurs qui sont sortis là aussi, on voit mieux, je crois. Donc, des gens ordinaires qui sortent dans leur balcon et qui commencent à chanter. C'est quelque chose qu'on ne faisait pas d'habitude. Là, je vois qu'on change. C'est quelque chose qu'on ne faisait pas d'habitude, qui ne se passait pas auparavant. Normalement, on sort pas, je sais pas, on sort pas aux fenêtres, on s'affiche pas dans nos balcons, on commence pas à chanter en situation, disons, normale et habituelle de vie. Mais comme toutes les règles étaient avaient basculé à ce moment-là du confinement, on assiste à ce type de manifestations qui sont relayées et qui font du bruit, on peut dire, sur les réseaux sociaux. Et une dernière remarque, il y a aussi des anonymes ou des leaders ad hoc qui font leur apparition dans ce genre de publications, comme par exemple les chanteurs ou donc des chanteurs qui sortent pour chanter et qui deviennent quelque part des exemples qui sont suivis par d'autres utilisateurs de réseaux sociaux. Ou nous avons eu en Roumanie, mais je sais que dans d'autres pays aussi, des actrices. Par exemple, là, j'ai deux captures d'écran avec deux actrices qui avaient proposé chaque jour pendant le confinement des lectures, soit des lectures de poèmes, soit des lectures d'histoire ou de fragments de littérature. Bon, et là, toujours à propos de ce mouvement, encore avant d'arriver, pardon, je me perds un peu dans la présentation, mais avant d'arriver aux conclusions, et à propos de l'émergence de ces, disons, leaders ad hoc sur les réseaux sociaux qui incitent l'intérêt des utilisateurs. Il y a une situation exceptionnelle que nous avons connue en Roumanie, où ce n'étaient pas les gens, donc les gens ordinaires qui soient sortis dans le balcon pour chanter et ensuite que ça soit relayé et publié sur les réseaux sociaux, mais nous avons eu pendant quelques jours une tentative des forces d'ordre, enfin de la police roumaine, qui est sortie dans les rues avec les mégaphones et avait diffusé dans les rues l'hymne de la Roumanie, mais c'est quelque chose qui, vu que c'était une action qui est venue de haut en bas et pas de bas en haut, n'a pas été très bien reçu, et finalement ils ont dû arrêter en quelques jours. Donc ça, c'était un peu l'exception, disons, sur ce genre d'initiative qui essayait quelque part de construire symboliquement le contexte. Et j'arrive à quelques conclusions. Donc, quelques conclusions pour dire que dans cette situation de crise, dans cette période qu'on peut appeler de liminalité, il y a une mise en question du statu quo, et cette mise en question du statu quo et des règles de tout ce qui était, disons, propre aux structures sociales jusqu'à ce moment-là. Donc, cet état de liminalité encourage une richesse symbolique et la créativité pour essayer finalement de comprendre ce qui n'est pas expliqué et pour essayer quelque part de combler le manque d'informations qu'on avait à l'époque. Voilà. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Camelia, pour cette belle présentation à la fois théorique et empirique. Je pense qu'il y aura des questions forcément pour votre présentation, mais maintenant je propose qu'on va tout de suite procéder à la deuxième présentation et on garde les questions plutôt à la fin. Comme ça, on aura une séance de questions et réponses bien plus riche, je l'espère. All right, so this is me switching back to English, and I just said to Camelia that we will have the panelists consecutively, one after the other, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the very end. Hopefully, we'll save some time this way, and then we can turn the Q&A session into a dialogue between the panelists and the audience. But to the audience, if you have questions and you want to address them to the speakers, you can always use the question tabs here on Livestorm. So please do not hesitate to type your questions there, and I'll make sure to read your questions to the panelists once the presentations are over. It looks like Professor Dalvit has not been able to join yet, and there's no problem. We can still wait until the end of the panel. So I suggest we move on to the next person on the list. And I am pleased to introduce to you Yidan Wang, who is going to talk to us today about the merged into nature with femininity. So there are questions of gender and the network society, which is very welcome and very enriching. So Yidan is a teaching assistant in network and new media department at Ankang University, where she mainly teaches courses on social media editing, introduction to network communication, and courses like those. She holds a master's degree in critical studies from Maryland Institute College of Art and a bachelor's degree in broadcast and television journalism from Sichuan University. And she's currently working on mass communication, visual culture, and digital subjectivity. And this is particularly something that I'm very interested in. And I look forward to your presentation, Yidan. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm going to share the screen here with my slides. Is it able to
So
see my...
yes, now we see your presentation. All you need to do is just go, there you go. Perfect.
Yes. Okay, sure. Hi everyone, this is Yidan Wang from Ankang University, China, and my topic today is Merged into Nature with Femininity on prevalence of Animal Crossing New Horizons during COVID-19 quarantine. First, I'm going to go through my structure, the structure of my presentation. My research explores the live simulation game Animal Crossing New Horizons, released in March 2020 amid global stay-home orders during COVID-19 pandemic. The game provided opportunities for the players to enjoy nature and get social interaction with others, which created extremely precious experience during COVID-19 and received enormous commercial success. In this presentation, I'm going to analyze the game theoretically from three aspects: the time-space structure of Animal Crossing New Horizons, social interaction and community construction, and the virtual community culture of ecofeminism in this game. Before we formally move on to the analysis of this game, let me introduce the game for a few minutes. Animal Crossing is a live simulation game published by Nintendo and can be played exclusively on Switch console. This game basically had three functions. The first is to build the island. In the beginning of the game, the player moves to a deserted island. As they finish tasks and craft items, players will gradually develop and customize their own islands. And the second, I call it dwell in nature. The environment in this game was designed as a tropical island, in which players are able to virtually enjoy nature, as they were not to do so during COVID-19 pandemic. And the third, I call it the interact with others. In this game, players are encouraged to get social interaction either with anthropomorphic animals or with other players' avatars, which helps the construction of the player's self-identity in this game, as well as the virtual community. And next, I'll move on to the time-space structure of Animal Crossing New Horizons, which is the material basis of its community culture. The time-space structure of the game is considerably different from other farm simulation game. For the matter of the time structure, it was designed as the same speed as real time, meaning the daily routine as well as season climate will change exactly as we experience in the physical world. The game tries to inform the players that we have to respect the operational laws of nature and live along with it, and that we as human beings should not attempt to change it. There are no pesticides or chemical fertilizers designed in this game to boost crop yields, and will be punishment if the players intends to change time to take benefit from it. This setting is different from other simulation games such as Harvest Moon or Farmville, as I show here, in which fertilizer can be used and time can be accelerated, which resembles the way we treat nature in real life. For our purpose of raising production, we would use chemical fertilizer, pesticides on crops, and change genes on plants or even animals, which demonstrate a capitalist idea of treating nature. And as for the space structure, the environmental ethics is best represented in the design of the museum in the game. The museum is curated by the NPC collectors who travels around the island in person to study its ecosystem. Therefore, the museum can eventually reproduce biotic communities and ecosystems in an elaborate way. For instance, the back exhibit has a room holding several exhibits with different biotypes, including later strong areas, seashore, jungle, and desert. And the aquarium has a room of 3 tanks. which is connected by waterfalls and playing fish found throughout a river from its source to its mouth, reflecting these fishes' real habitats. And usually players catching insects, fishing, or planting flowers is for the purpose of earning bells, in which resembles the concept of capitalism, of dominating and utilizing nature for our own benefit. However, when players decide to donate them to the museum, they finish these tasks for building a community instead of instrumental purposes. And curator bladders would inform them the knowledge on their species and their habitats, while players learn about nature with reflective sound and immersive environments. They start rebuilding connections with nature, feeling and appreciating nature in awe and wonder. Through this process, players finish the transformation of role from exploiter to experiencer with re-enchantment of nature. However, we have to notice that as an online simulation game, this game also conforms to the time-space structure of network society. There are three concepts that can be used to elaborate the time-space structure of network, which are Yidan's concept of disembedding, Harvey's concept of time-space compression, and Castro's concept of space of flows and timeless time. We can conclude from these theories that the rise of network society recreates the mode of time-space which is both compressed and expanded, and human beings are experiencing floating, juxtaposing, and undifferentiated lives in cyberspace. As for the mode of space, the disembedding and delocalization mechanism of cyberspace pulls people out of their own time and space and re-embeds them into virtual ones. Animal Crossing brings players out of their actual houses to virtual tropical islands. In this world, they can not only work on their own islands, but also take a virtual trip to other islands with no time consumption. In this way, all the players and islands are connected in the Animal Crossing universe, and players' islands have become their home virtually and semiotically, and those who are separated can be connected here. And as for the mode of time, even though the game is designed as normal planetary time mode, as players are locked up in their house, who don't need to work and sleep with normal living rhythms. They live with the mediated gaming time mode. The time players experience depends on the media consumption and the players they've been interacting with. For instance, if a player flies to an island of other time zone, they are able to experience the life there, meaning the networked media reconstructs our sense of time. Therefore, we can summarize that Animal Crossing creates the time-space structure both physically and virtually, where separated space means the space of flows and planetary time means the timeless time. And next, we'll move on to the third part, the social interaction and community construction. As not analyzed before, Animal Crossing is not a simple farm simulation game that focuses on accumulating capital. Rather, it emphasizes the activity of social interaction. Social interaction is such a precious experience during COVID-19 pandemic, when people around the world lose their jobs, stay home and watching devastating news and feel lonely, anxious, and meaningless. However, in this game, they can interact virtually with each other, even though they are not at the same spot. Through digitally mediated communication, players are able to interact in flash. They can meet each other face-to-face, stay in the same room, enjoying scenery or playing together while chatting via text box. The game has become a virtual place for players to carry out mediated rituals, such as going on dates, holding birthday parties, or wedding ceremonies. This virtually corporeal interaction of players' avatars in these mediated rituals can contribute on shaping their self-identities in this game. With networked communication, interaction of participants, and generation of member-driven content, relationships are built up and the virtual community appears. According to Wenger, new technologies such as the internet have extended the reach of our interactions beyond the geographical limitations of traditional communities, and it expands the possibilities for community and calls for new kinds of communities based on shared practice. So for the next section, this paper will concentrate on the virtual community and its culture. Animal Crossing New Horizons has strong feminine features in this community. We can tell from the statistics that although the percentage of male-female players are split in this game, we have to keep in mind that female owners of Switch consist only 10% of all Switch players. Therefore, we may draw the conclusion that, as for those who possess Switch consoles, females who purchase Animal Crossing New Horizons are much more than males of that. And video games market has always not been the market established for female consumers. We can tell from the demographics of Switch possession. However, Animal Crossing is designed to change this situation. As CEO of Nintendo, Iwata, asserted, Animal Crossing is the game that brings female players to console game market and reverse the situation that the main game market is mostly consisted of male players. Video games market has always not been the many scholars has observed the phenomenon that females are less interested in digital games, play less frequently and for shorter duration than do males. In terms of this problem, scholar Thilo Hartmann investigates what features female dislikes mostly in digital games, and he concludes that the lack of meaningful social interaction, violent and competitive elements, and sexual gender role stereotyping of game characters are the most important reasons. And Animal Crossing avoids the dislikes of female players and caters for their preference. Unlike mainstream video games which take fun in killing, competing, and destructing, and represent capitalist patriarchal culture, the narrative of Animal Crossing revolves around crafting home and establishing relationships. Its concept is constructive, nursing, friendly, and it suggests female-nature connection as well as ecofeminist philosophy. Ecofeminism rejects fundamental dualism in analytical philosophy, like reason versus emotion, mind versus body, culture versus nature, and objectivity versus subjectivity. In this structure, female and nature are depreciated as the latter of these units, which merges these two as the oppressed and subordinate objects. Therefore, they are philosophically two inseparable concepts. Revised from Na's terminology of deep ecology, ecofeminism proposed the selves they urge human beings to build, which are both individual selves and ecological selves. Scholar Plumwood emphasizes that human beings are interdependent beings in relationships with each other and with nature. In the case of Animal Crossing, as players chatting with animal residents, sending presents mutually and attending events together, and receiving sweet letters from residents, they start forming tender, caring, relational, and ecological selves from these emotional connections. Also, ecofeminism inherits the theories of feminist ethics, especially from ethics of care proposed by Carol Gilligan, who argues that unlike more well-known ethical models such as consequential theories and the ontological theories, care ethics seeks to incorporate feminized virtues and values which are absent in such traditional mode of ethics. This brings the debate between justice and care. The former perspective emphasizes individual rights and duties and appeal to universal rules for moral assessment of human conduct, and the latter perspective emphasizes feminine values such as care and empathy, and it claims that this feminine perspective of ethics cannot reduce to individual rights or duties, and it does not appeal to ahistorical rules or principles. Therefore, it will not cause moral blindness or indifference, and stimulate people to make decisions under certain circumstances. In the realm of ecofeminism, scholars claim that care, empathy, and friendship for nature and animals is morally righteous, which involve moral emotions that are necessary in ethics, ethical decision-making, and ethical conduct. As for this game, it puts people under the context of nature living and interacting environment. So we feel necessary to take good care of and live in harmony with the animal residents and in nature in general. Through the emotional design between players and their villagers, the game nurtures the moral emotions and the ethics of care. So in conclusion, the game urges us to show respect, awe, and care for nature from a feminine perspective, and the anthropomorphic philosophical proposition of environmentalism and feminism shines anew in the virtual community of Animal Crossing New Horizons. So this is my presentation.
Thank
today.
you. Thank you, Yidan, for that presentation. And I'm sure there are questions for you. And like Camelia,
Okay.
I also suggest to you to wait for the questions, and then we'll have the questions at the very end after Lorenzo's and Ayşegül's presentations.
Okay.
I specifically like how in the game that you were presenting to us, there's the word crossing, and that links nicely with Camelia's presentation, who was talking to us about liminality, which is a form of crossing from one place to the other, or that position of undecidability. So that's a really interesting link we could definitely go back to. All right, so I am glad to finally welcome Lorenzo on stage, Professor Lorenzo Dalvit, who is a professor of digital media and cultural studies at Rhodes University in Makanda, South Africa. His areas of academic research are digital media theory and education, digital inequalities, and online discourses. He authored and co-authored more than 150 publications and supervised more than 30 postgraduate students across various disciplines in media studies, communication, education, and African languages and computer science, if you believe that. So we have a very interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary scholar with us, and we're privileged to have that. So Professor Dalvit is also the National Research Foundation rated researcher and has participated in a number of international research and mobility programs. Professor Dalvit will talk to us today about problematizing network spatialities and temporalities, new inclusions and exclusions at South African universities. Welcome, Lorenzo, Professor Dalvit, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mehdi, and thank you very much, colleagues. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear, Lorenzo.
Wow, wonderful, excellent. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for the problems earlier on. Great. So first of all, a little bit about the context of my own university. It is a small residential university of South Africa, a rural province. It's based in a small town, and it is, in South African terms, a historically white university. That means relatively well-resourced, relatively advantaged type of university, but obviously in the new dispensation, it is in the also demographically. That means having more and more students previously classified as blacks, and increasingly so more and more students from a relatively low socioeconomic background, like this in South African terms. So we see a lot of the inequalities that characterize South African society being reproduced and at my own university as a case in point. For this reason, South African universities, so the whole sector, over the past 7 years, 6-7 years, has been shaken by a wave of student protests calling for, number one, decolonization of the curriculum of the university, and number two, in more practical terms, free higher education for all. So in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic and the transformations that it brought about. When COVID-19 struck, South Africa implemented some of the most restrictive measures in the world. So, for instance, very strict curfew, a ban on the sale of alcohol. What is meant for this is a sudden and forced emergency shift to remote teaching, learning, and communication with staff and students. So at short notice, everybody had to leave campus. And another interesting aspect is that within this situation, within this remote teaching and learning, distant presence, right, in our terms, we had a wave of renewed student protests at the beginning of this year. So we are talking about February, March, renewed student protests by students who were initially prevented from registering on financial ground. So students on financial aid who did not receive their payments registered. Now, in order to understand this, the response of the university to the pandemic was initially to send everybody home, and then to introduce a phased approach to bring in some students and some staff back. So prioritizing returns. This required identifying those students who needed and providing data first and foremost, and secondly, laptops to those students in need, those who desperately needed it. So it required quite a long and complex exercise of data collection, a lot of decisions making, meetings, task teams, etc. So it was quite an onerous process. Find out who needed a laptop, who needed data, where they were, etc., who needed to come back. So it posed quite a lot of challenges, practical challenges. When people started coming back, obviously access to campus had to be restricted. So there is a procedure of receiving a permit to access campus. There is screening at the entrances. There are guards checking people's temperature, making sure that they have a permit. Students can also apply for permits if they've not been invited, but they still feel and need to come back. So in a sense, a very controlled physical space. It is a small campus separated from the rest of the town, very easy to control. It's a delimited space. Now, in terms of the frameworks for this presentation and for the subsequent paper, I will draw particularly on the concept of spaces of flows and the related concept of timeless time, right, in relation to our situation. So my university, as it as it can be understood as a space of flow, particularly in the last year and a half. The data comes mainly from available online documents, media statements by the university itself, newspaper articles one can find online, social media texts, particularly by students who use platforms like Twitter, for instance, to organize themselves, protests, etc. And I will focus particularly on the last 6 months. So from the beginning of the year, for us the year begins in February, from the beginning of the year up to the present moment. And 2 significant things happened. As I've already mentioned, the students who were financially excluded from registering started protesting at the beginning of the year. So initially a physical protest, which was quite surprising because, as I said, most of the students have been sent home, so only a limited number have been invited back, mainly first-year students. Nevertheless, attendance was substantial, big numbers of students and, in some cases, staff who blocked the entrance. Now, this might sound a little bit complicated, but at this point, earlier in 2021, a number of staff and quite a number of students were actually expected to be on campus. So blocking the entrances constituted quite a major disruption, right? It's a traditional form of protest that our students are very familiar with, but it had some unexpected consequences in this particular moment, right? If you look at our university as a space of flows, it has the problem that the staff members who were prevented from accessing campus are the same who were supposed to, on the one hand, manage the distribution of laptops to new students, on the other, accept and advise the provision of data to those students who needed it. So paradoxically, the protest itself disrupted not only the physical entrance to campus, the physical access to campus, but also, let's call it the virtual participation of particularly disadvantaged students who could not get the laptop, who could not get data, who could not accommodate it. On the other hand, we have also witnessed a new form of protest enabled by this new situation. Let's call it Zoom bombing, right, so that we can understand each other. We are talking about an online class, an online lesson using Zoom, and we are talking about protesting students who entered and started chanting, disrupting, so basically brought traditional forms of protests into this new virtual space. And that was also an interesting dynamic to witness, because on the one hand, the transition to e-learning, the use of virtual platforms, enabled the university to bypass the protests, right? So to carry on to some extent for those students who could. But on the other, it created a new avenue for the protesters to be disruptive, and yet, at a third level, it made it relatively easy to reconfigure access to the lessons so that passcode was required, so that students could be muted, etc. And so, again, the tools to suppress these new forms of protest much more effectively than was the case for physical protests either this year or 5 years ago. All right, so this is an interesting aspect concerning the protest. Now, the second moment, right, once this initial situation was resolved, students were able to rest, and the protests stopped. The second moment was the return to campus. The university adopted a phased approach, so invited some students, invited some staff, issued permit. An interesting thing is that once the university decided that a category of students was fit to come back, for instance, students who needed to access university laboratory as part of their course, pharmacy students, for instance, or chemistry. Once the university decided that it was a good idea for those students to come back, they invited the students back and they cut the provision of data. So essentially, in this way, forcing students who could not afford to pay for their own data, forcing those students to come back to campus. And bearing in mind that in South Africa, we are going towards the winter and we are witnessing the third and much worse wave of the pandemic. And that vaccination is still at the very beginning, right? So the situation not changed, but through managing the provision of data, and in this particular case, cutting data, the university is basically putting particularly poor students in a situation in which they have to come back. Remember, it's a residential university in a small town in a rural province. A lot of our students come from far away, right? So all throughout the country, long distance by bus in order to be here. And then from the point of view of the staff, an interesting dynamic is that the possibility to come back to work somehow translated as an order and a summon to be work, even for academics. This was not the case for the pandemic. Academics typically would go to the office anyway, but there was definitely no expectation that an academic would be present in the department. However, when the possibility of coming back emerged, the university, the language in which messages were cut, implied that staff members, including academics, had to go back. And if not, if they had a good reason not to, then they had to justify to their head of department and motivate and have some particular circumstances, etc. So accessing that physical space was again managed from the top. So in terms of the response of the university, a few features that emerged was generally a top-down decision-making. So the task team decided what was going to happen and then communicated it to the various departments, to the students in a very top-down fashion with no real mechanism to talk, with no shared decision-making, accountability, etc. This is understandable in a time of crisis, a bit less so in a moment in which the crisis is becoming normalized in a way. It's been 1.5 years, so it's becoming part of our new normal, in inverted commas. And then a third aspect was the gathering of information. I mentioned being asked to motivate, to justify for staff who wanted to stay off campus. I mentioned the need for students who wanted to enter campus and were not invited, the need for those students to motivate and justify why they had to have access to campus. And then information gathering very early in the process to the needed laptop. So quite an invasive process of understanding where students lived, how many people in the household, if their conditions were conducive to studying remotely, etc. Quite a detailed process of information gathering. And last but not least, at the entrance to campus, measuring of temperature, installation of a tracking mobile app, etc., controlled access to buildings. So everybody who comes in and out is registered, recorded, etc. So this brings me to the link with the key theoretical concept of space of flows and, to a lesser extent, timeless time. And I would like to think about them in terms of one particular dimension of power, network power, that Cusnir is interested in. So the dimension of networking power, inclusion versus exclusion. I will start by reflecting a bit on some instances of coercive inclusion. So people who are forced in. So first of all, as I mentioned, the assumption is that the ideal situation is for everybody to be on campus physically as it was before. And this assumption has been, has informed the way the university approached the return of students and staff. So by assuming that everybody would want and should ideally come back, once the university said it was possible, there was an assumption that everybody should. So basically, the injunction, the invitation to campus basically became an order to come back, or a very strong pressure to come back. The second element of coercive inclusion is quite obvious, the fact that everybody, whether they wanted to or not, was start using platforms like Zoom, which I've mentioned, WhatsApp is another one, WhatsApp groups to keep people informed, our own e-learning platform, which is based on Moodle, etc. And you might be aware of the controversy around platformization issue, the political economy behind it, etc. And I've already mentioned the monitoring of access to campus, access to buildings, the motivation, the screening process, etc. Am I running out of time? I hear some noise in the background.
Almost, Lorenzo. It would be great. I would be grateful if you sort of started to steer your conversation towards.
Thank you very much.
That would be perfect. Yes.
Okay, I'll try and be as quick as possible. Okay, the second dimension, covert exclusion. So people left out now. And the first group, quite obvious, is previously disadvantaged students. So in reality, students who come from a marginalized background, who struggle to not only to source their own data, because is only part of the issue. Some of our students, they live in rural areas where there is no connectivity. They have to walk to the end of the village in order to be able to connect through their cell phone. Just to give you an idea, an image of the kind of problems. And it is particularly those students who have been excluded from the shift to online learning and teaching. You can think about diverse people in other terms. My own experience as a blind person has been that a lot of the conventions, when we speak, when we transitioned to online teaching and learning, a lot of the conventions are actually quite exclusionary Let me make an example. When at the beginning of a Zoom meeting, everybody's asked to turn their camera, for me, it actually reproduces that external gaze, that position of disadvantage that I experienced in physical presence and had somehow disappeared online as long as the camera is turned off. And I'm happy to elaborate on that a bit more if you want. Most important thing, in my opinion, is that the response by the university in almost every respect silenced dissenting voices through hierarchical top-down communication, through the shift to online communication, on the one hand, easy to mute people, and that's it. Actually, along these two lines, it is very difficult to talk back, to make one's word, and to criticize the decisions being taken. Okay, let me end with 3 quick ideas around a possible new normal, right, which I liked a couple of paradoxes. So first of all, the idea of a hybrid presence. So those who want to or have to can be present on campus, take advantage of connectivity. Those who prefer or must stay away, they could connect remotely. Right? So the idea of building some nuance in the idea of distance, right? Not assuming that everybody is the same and everybody should be there physically. The second one, the idea that education, the way we have always known it, assumes that everybody comes at the same time for a lesson. Now, this is more efficient in physical terms, but in virtual terms, in virtual environments, is not efficient at all. We are simply forcing people to connect from different parts of the country and with different types of connectivity, forcing them to connect within a particular time slot, and it creates quite a lot of frustrations. I probably noticed earlier with my own issues. Whereas asynchronous communication would work reasonably well for teaching and learning, and it could be a very viable model. But the most important aspect is that throughout the process, very little agency has been given to staff and students. Decisions are taken elsewhere and imposed on members of our community. And this is that coercive inclusion and covert exclusion come into play. Okay, thank you very much for your patience, and I'm very glad if you have any questions.
Thank you, Lorenzo. That was a fascinating presentation, and the South African perspective was really interesting, and I personally enjoyed it, and I'm sure the others have as well. I mean, your presentation was a perfect illustration of a crucial point in Castell's work, and that is how the space of flows is actually not necessarily egalitarian, and you beautifully illustrate that and problematize it as a question or as a problem of access, and we'll definitely come back to you on this, Lorenzo. So before we go to the Q&A sessions, though, we have a final presentation, and I am pleased to introduce and welcome Dr. Ayşegül Akaydın Aydın. Yeah. Okay, who studied television journalism in Istanbul University and media management in Marmara University. She got her PhD from Radio, TV, Cinema department at Istanbul University. She worked as a research assistant in Istanbul University for a number of years, and she's been working as assistant professor at Istanbul Aydin University Journalism Department. Her interests include communication theories, new television technologies, and television culture. Today, Ayşegül is going to talk to us about surveillance culture in the network society during the COVID-19 and as a matter of application in Turkey. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Is my voice heard?
We hear your voice, but there seems to be a little bit of a background noise where you are.
Because of my internet. Sorry for the external voices. Okay.
No problem. We can hear you.
My paper name is Surveillance Culture in Network Society during Coronavirus. HES code application in Turkey. First of all, in my presentation, I would like to explain what is pandemic era in Turkey, what happened in Turkey. And secondly, I would like to explain contextual and theoretical framework. And then I present my work. Okay, that's my paper name, Surveillance Culture in a Network Society. Pandemic period in Turkey, the COVID-19 pandemic, which emerged in Wuhan, China in December 2019 and spread to many countries in short time. But in Turkey, first case of coronavirus in Turkey on March 11, 2020. And then public schools and universities are transferred to online education. The activities of entertainment venues are suspended in 15th of March. Flights to Germany, Spain, France, Australia, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Belgium, and Holland are mutually halted. According to the coronavirus data on the 20th of April 2020, the cases in Turkey are stated as 19,918, and number of deaths 2,140. The restrictions of COVID-19 is still on the field of education, commercial, economy, tourism, and culture in 2021. In Turkey, having got into full closure between the periods, 19 April and 17th of May 2021 were executed lockdowns. As of 1st July 2021, the normalizing process will be started. Conceptual and theoretical framework of my study, the concept of network society and surveillance culture. Network society, conceptualized by Manuel Castells, is a new word form. It is considered as an approach that argues that the order of, with the developing technologies, the power of networks are increasing, and the idea of network society affects our lives more. With the new forms of communication, information is produced quickly and consumed at the same speed. Knowledge is power in network society. According to Castells, Manuel Castells, society reformed through information and communication technologies, and pandemic era is rapidly change our life. And also, I would like to tell Anthony Giddens' surveillance culture. According to Giddens, surveillance has two meanings. The first meaning is people are turning into objects by government. Information collected, it goes beyond simple information gathering, and people classify it. Second meaning of surveillance, authority observe the actions of others. In modern societies is too easily factory, offices, prison, mental hospitals. The Jeremy Bentham is considered to be the basis of surveillance, but the pandemic has accelerated surveillance process in the network society. Previously, our location could be easily learned with our mobile phones, wearable technologies. Also in data known as historical traffic search, records the color, the dial, the calls made by the people with their phones, mobile phones especially. It contains information such as time, call duration, call location, and base station from which the signals is received. And then, what is HES code? HES code means life life fits into home. Turkey Ministry of Health Sorry. What is HES code? Turkey Ministry of Health experiencing 3 different applications due to pandemic. Coronavirus control application, pandemic isolation tracking project, and these 2 applications merge under the name of the application Life Fits into Home, Hayat Eve Sığar. People have used HES code since June 4th, 2020. After this regulation, people entrance to all public institutions in Turkey, a circular issued by the Ministry of Interior, HES code has been imposed. In addition to these regulations, HES code is also used in restaurants, shopping malls, stores, public transportation. With this application, the Ministry of Health is using MERNIS. MERNIS means that Central Population System information, and e-pulse data. E-pulse data means about health. How to get access to HES code via application, and we write this application our information, personal information, and then everybody has HES code. Our methodology in my paper concentrates on surveillance culture and network society. I prefer to use qualitative methodology, qualitative research. Focus group interview was made with 10 person using HES code. I choose these 10 people randomly. My questions: when did you first need HES code? Where are you asked for HES code? Does it feel safe to be asked for HES code when taking public transport or indoor places? Is the HES code an effort to be taken against the pandemic? Do you think that your personal data, health data, location information are collected in a single hands? Have you ever taught HES codes ethically? I create a discussion area. People discussed these questions and debate about HES code. According to answers, I collect the data and write this data and classify it. In my conclusion, in my paper, according to answers, people aware that they are being tracking, but they have to use HES code. The pandemic has added voluntary basis to the surveillance culture. People know tracking by the government. Asking the HES code makes people feel safe, and HES code is used mostly in shopping malls and public transport. People have to use HES code for shopping malls, going to shopping malls, public transport. But people feel safe about this. And in my conclusion, big data is watching you. Governments also collect our data and use data one day. Thanks for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ayşegül, for that presentation. Many thanks indeed to you all. All right, so we've had 4 presentations. Obviously, the obvious link is the COVID situation, but there are other theoretical connections, and we could definitely address them. All right, so the Q&A session is now open. Yes, but there is an echo. I don't know, something's wrong here. Can everybody hear me right? Yeah?
Yes, we can.
Okay,
yes.
okay, great. So now the floor is open to the audience as well. And what we can do is, if the audience, our esteemed audience, can can type their questions in the chat box. Then I'll make sure to relay the questions to our panelists. And while they're doing that, I can perhaps start, but the panelists themselves obviously have the privilege of asking, in case they have questions for one another, they can just address it to each other. And this is all, by the way, we're doing it to save some bandwidth and have the quality as it is. We have some time. We're privileged to have time still for the discussions. Perhaps I can start off the questions with one. It's more like a comment, plutôt un commentaire, ou c'est une question aussi, Camelia. Et je vais faire ça en français parce que votre présentation c'était en français. Et donc j'ai bien aimé en fait le concept que vous avez mobilisé. Un des concepts que vous avez, c'est liminalité. À l'époque, dans ma jeunesse, j'ai travaillé aussi sur ce concept-là, mais dans un autre contexte. Et vous me dites si j'ai bien compris, vous essayez de lire ce qu'appelle Castells comme l'espace de flux ou la virtualité comme une forme de liminalité, c'est-à-dire qu'on vit dans une transition, mais cette transition-là, elle n'est pas complètement aboutie, mais nous sommes dans cet espace liminal. Et donc, est-ce que pour vous, le liminal comme tel, c'est peut-être un exemple, une illustration de ce qu'on appelle le virtuel dans le sens de Deleuze. Et Deleuze, il dit que le virtuel, on ne peut pas l'opposer au réel parce que le virtuel est en réalité ce qui n'est pas encore actualisé, ce qui a le potentiel d'être actualisé et donc c'est réel. Voilà. Je ne sais pas si ça fait sens ce que je dis, mais voilà, je vous laisse la parole.
Oui, merci. En fait, votre commentaire va au-delà de ce que j'avais pensé parce que moi, j'avais interprété en termes de liminalité, notamment ce qui s'est passé dans le virtuel, disons, mais pendant la crise sanitaire, pendant le début de la crise sanitaire, au moins pendant la première partie de confinement. Mais ce que vous dites, c'est en fait une possible extension, une généralisation qui sera peut-être intéressante à investiguer.
Ou dangereux, une généralisation qui peut être dangereuse aussi, je suis bien conscient. Voilà. Voilà, il y a toujours ce danger-là d'essayer de trop théoriser en fait les choses. Et c'est ce que moi j'habite un monde plutôt théorique et vous en fait avec l'étude empirique que vous montrez, vous dites que voilà, ça nuance davantage. Mais vous pensez que ça peut aller dans ce sens où je dis ou pas?
Oui, à mon avis, ça peut être une piste pour continuer en fait pour aller au-delà de cette étude empirique qui est quand même limitée du point de vue temporel.
Très bien, excellent. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Camelia. All right, so while the other people might have a question for you, Camelia, I have one for Professor Dalvit, and he gave us a hint, Lorenzo, that he'd be interested to talk about, and I'm really interested. He pitched the idea, and then I was waiting for it, and then I think the time is now. You wanted to talk to us a little bit more, I think, Lorenzo, about how cameras on Zoom carries with itself a possible politics of gaze. And I would really like you to tell us and address it, if you can. Lorenzo? Is Lorenzo with us? So you need to activate your mic, your microphone, Lorenzo, so we can hear you, if you've heard my question. But no problem. So I'll come back to you, Lorenzo. Oh yeah, there you are.
Okay, here we go. I'm sorry, I need the whole team to help me. Thank you very much. Thanks for the question. It is the concept of gaze is obviously a very interesting one with a long tradition. Right? Think, for instance, about Bentham, popularized by Foucault. the idea that as a measure of control, there is the central point, the eye of God that can see everybody, and that enforces and normalizes behavior. So people regulate themselves, right? This is an extreme case. So this is an extreme case, like in a prison type of setting. The interesting thing for me is to think about it in everyday situations, the teaching and learning, and thinking about it not as a, how to say it, not as a comprehensive, holistic situation in which everybody is included. The interesting thing here is to build some nuance and see how, without realizing it, we actually construct a difference and a form of marginalization and exclusion for particular individuals. In my case, it is obvious because, as I mentioned, I cannot see. So, for me, the most frustrating thing about not being able to see, when I'm in class, for instance, the most frustrating thing about not being able to see in a class situation is not the fact that I don't see my students, is the fact that they can see me. And it is here that the concept of gaze comes in handy, right? The idea that you are being seen, and being seen is a measure of control, and in some cases even oppression. There is quite a lot of literature about feminist literature about male gaze, right? Being under and living in the male gaze. For me, the interesting thing in terms of my presentation is how within this new space of flows, we tend to reproduce this covert form of microaggression. And particularly interesting is the fact that it is, I'm sure, completely subconscious and completely unintentional. Difficult for my colleagues to realize that when they ask everybody to switch on their camera, to show who they are, it's very difficult for my colleagues to realize that while they're doing that, they are actually performing a mild, minor form of microaggression towards me, that they are reproducing an asymmetric relationship, which in the actually prevents. Mehdi, does it answer your question? Should I elaborate a little bit more?
It does, and thank you, Lorenzo. And it opens up for the discussion to pursue this. And you rightly mentioned the work of Laura Mulvey when you, I think that's the reference you had in mind when you said the male gaze. And it's really important, and your example really showed it. Not only the space of flows, not only timeless time, but also the visual field itself is never neutral, and there's always a resistance to some form of hegemony that's always at place. And network power is definitely a very fruitful concept, and you rightly mentioned that. I was just wondering whether you've had a chance to look into Lacan's conception of the gaze, or not at all, because he's talked a lot about the gaze as well. Yeah, okay, great.
Sorry about that. Very useful suggestion. Thank you very much.
Yeah, great, awesome. Just a quick question, Lorenzo. When you were talking, at some point I didn't hear you, or maybe there was something wrong with my headset. You said staff members were preventing from accessing the campus, and I was just wondering why. Probably yes. You said it, but I'm just wondering why were they prevented from accessing the campus?
By protesting students.
Oh, okay, got it. All right.
Students were protesting against not being allowed to register on financial grounds. And so they implemented the traditional form of protest. So they did a sit-in with placards, and they physically blocked entrances to campus.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Great, thank you very much. So in your opinion, and after this study, and you did answer it in part, do you think that the transition that we have today in the space of flows makes it easier to engage more in a civil contestation, or makes it easier to control by the powers? Does the transition, I mean, it's a really overgeneralizing kind of question, but I want to hear your take. So should we be optimistic basically about the transition in terms of civil society in general and resistance, or not really?
Obviously, in terms of the potential, both. Unfortunately, as academics, is always is never a yes or no question. So the potential is there for both. I think that the interesting thing, and the point I hope I was trying to make, is that the way this transition has been interpreted is to, in my particular context and in this particular moment, seems to be more in the direction of, on the one hand, real normal in a virtual space. On the other, reinforce forms of control, right? So monitoring, seeing where people are, and deciding where people are. For me, the interesting thing in my last few comments about hybrid presence, asynchronous communication, and agency to staff and students, that's where I would like to propose an alternative for the future. Either as a form of protest, mass protest, but I think it would be more useful to think about it as a form of counterpower or a form of resistance. In this sense, that the opportunity that I see is for a much more efficient and individualized interaction with institutions and individualized situations. The problem that I see is that we are trying to find a one-size-fits-all for everybody. In my case, once it is possible to come back to campus, then everybody has to come back, as if we are all the same. On a smaller scale, once we are on Zoom, and I assume the majority of people able to see each other, then everybody has to see each other, right? Everybody has to turn their camera on. For no particular reason. In fact, one of the great affordances of the virtual space is customization after all. So, for no particular reason, we are taking away agency from individual and concentrating it. In structures, in institutions, etc. So this, I think, this is my main point.
Mm-hmm. Point perfectly illustrated. Thank you, Lorenzo. Thank you very much. I really look forward to having more of these discussions, and I'll definitely look into your work to have more insight of that. Thanks a lot. So I'm having a field day here because I don't see any questions in the chat box, so I'm asking all the questions. So if you want to stop me asking questions, audience, just come up and type your questions. Ayşegül, I want to come back to what you said about the HES code, which I didn't know of. So my question is how you addressed it, obviously, but I want to hear more of how the civil society have reacted to the HES code. What have been the major reactions to it?
Civil society, they say that civil societies feel safe about HES code. Everybody has HES code, and our government say that everybody have to use this code, but civil society has no reaction. No reaction.
Is it because of the surveillance culture that exists in Turkey? Yes. Or okay, all right.
Surveillance culture exists in Turkey much more.
Believe me, I my home country is Iran, so I know all about it. So you don't even have to explain that to me. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, so one question for Yidan before I hand it to you guys. Yidan, at some point, one of your slides, you showed us that how the Switch console is predominantly used by men. Does that reference, is that a worldwide reference, or are you talking about a specific country?
Excuse me.
Do you want me to repeat my question?
Oh, yeah,
sure, no problem. So one of your slides, you showed us that the Switch console, it's predominantly, it's almost completely used by men. So there's a fragment of women who are interested in that, yeah? So my question is, and probably you said that, or I didn't hear it, does that, do those statistics, do they refer to this use worldwide, or are you talking about a specific country?
I think it's worldwide because it is the data from Nintendo company.
Okay.
So yeah.
And you, why do you think it's the case? You quoted somebody, but I didn't have time to catch the reference. And why is that? Yeah.
Why is only 10% of its users are females?
Yeah, basically that's the question. Yeah.
Yeah, I think as I analyzed in the paper, the console game market is traditionally the game market that was designed for male players. Like for the famous game that we know in the market are always about like killing and monsters, things like that. So as I analyzed after that, females are not much interested in like killing or violence elements.
Hence your eco-feminist reading of it. That makes sense now. Sorry, I think I got disconnected at some point. We were explaining it. Yeah, but it makes sense. It makes better sense for me. Okay, great. Thank you, Yidan. All right. So panelists, in case you have a question for one another, please feel free to open up your mics and ask the questions. And if not, we have been extremely efficient in time management because we are going to be able to finish 15 minutes before our allocated time. And if that's the case, I wish to thank you, all four of you, again. Merci beaucoup. Camelia, thank you all for the rich presentations. It has been lovely to meet you and talk to you virtually. I wish we could welcome you in person, but hopefully in our future conferences, you will be able to come to Lille and we can give you all the nice refreshments that France is known for, all the croissants and the petit pain. So if there are no final questions or words, I can steer this to an end. All the best to you all. Thank you again, and see you probably tomorrow or for Professor Kestel's keynote talk. All the best to you all.
Merci, Mehdi.
Merci.
Thank you.
No, non preoccupare, era solo per dire grazie, ciao, eccetera. Si è chiuso. Ok, va bene.